Case of the Missing Messiah.
I've decided to begin this program reading a Sherlock Holmes mystery because there's a direct connection between that master sleuth and this show. Sherlock Holmes had the uncanny ability of solving every case that came his way. This program is also about a case that spans thousands of years and, if solved, could directly affect the lives of billions of people. Please stay with us as we present the case of the missing Messiah.
The search for the Messiah is based purely on deductive, inductive, and conclusive reasoning. A given set of evidence shall form the basis of all possible conclusions. Almost all world religions await the coming of a Messiah of some type. Christians anticipate the coming of Christ. Muslims await the coming of Christ and Mahdi. Hindus also wait for the periodic return of Krishna. Zoroastrians, First Nations peoples, Jews, and many others also expect a similar arrival. If it were unimportant for us to recognize such a Messiah whenever and if ever he comes, then the question arises, why? Why is it that his coming is predicted by so many different religions scattered all over the world? In our viewpoint, it is of extreme importance that we know, recognize, and accept the Messiah when he arrives. This case will be researched and based on the Jewish and Christian books, collectively known as the Holy Bible.
Today, many Christian scholars and evangelists predict the coming of Christ. In fact, a day does not go by when someone doesn't predict that the second coming is at hand. Two questions arise from this behavior. The first is simply, when did this practice of proclaiming that the Messiah is at hand begin? The second question stems from the first. On what evidence were these predictions made? And can this evidence be of any benefit in solving this case?
History tells us that immediately prior to 1000 AD, many preachers announced the impending end of the world. Millet of Cromeriz predicted the end somewhere between 1365 and 1367. The Anabaptists predicted 1525, and Alsted in Germany named 1674. The French theologian Giraud chose 1730. Christoph Hoffmann undertook to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem for Christ's occupancy in 1826. Bengel fixed the date of Christ's return at 1836, and from this prediction, others followed in rapid succession. The Irvingites in England and Scotland announced 1835, 1838, 1864, and 1866. Mother Lee and her Shakers abolished matrimony as they also believed the end was at hand. Cunningham named 1839, Eliot predicted 1866, Brewer and Decker both predicted 1867, and Sayce favored 1870. William Miller, who predicted 1844, had 50,000 followers, many of whom were so convinced of Christ's return on October 22, 1844, that they failed to plant crops, gave away their money, discharged their employees, settled their accounts, and made preparations for the climactic midnight cry, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him." A famous Jewish convert, Joseph Wolf, predicted 1847. In 1881, Klaas Epp, a leader of the Mennonite Brethren in Russia, predicted Christ's return on March 8, 1889. The Duke of Orrs, who settled in Canada, set forth in 1902, naked to meet the Lord. Reverend Cumming, in his book, The End, concluded that all the signs of those days were preparing the way for the fulfillment of the prophecy for the second coming of Jesus Christ. The Christian scholar wrote, "Christ is at our door." In fact, The 19th century was so full of events, particularly from 1830 onwards, that an air of religious fervor in the vast majority of Christian nations came into existence. Henry James Forman, in his book, The Story of Prophecy, states that
A Lady Hester Stanhope, a valiant madwoman, niece of William Pitt, who turned her back on London in power and fashion, made her home in Lebanon, amongst the Arabs and Druzes, in order to be ready and near the scene of the Advent. She kept, it was reported, 2 white Arab steeds in her stable, one for the Messiah and one for herself.
Harriet Livingston, a famous Washingtonian, preached the second coming of Christ before the House of Representatives, where crowds gathered to hear her.
So real was the hope of the Advent that people were actually taking almost violent actions for it.
Well, we've answered the first question. The Messiah was expected around the middle of the last century. The announcement, the Messiah is at hand, was sounded in all 5 continents by thousands of Christian scholars almost simultaneously. Continuing our case, we'll investigate the second question and search for the evidence these Christian scholars used to form their conclusion that the Messiah's time had come.
To compile this evidence, we must obviously refer to the Holy Scriptures. The predictions regarding the return of Christ, as found in the Bible, can be placed into 4 categories. The first refer to the time of his arrival. The second, to special events and circumstances that were to take place during that time. The third, to how he and his followers were to be treated. And the fourth, to the place of his arrival. More evidence is found regarding the time of Christ's return in a book published by the American Mission called Millennium Dawn. This book states that from the time of the creation of Adam up until the year 1872, 6,000 years had passed, entering into the 7th thousand. This was a time for Christ's return. Also, more time evidence is found in the fulfillment of the verse in Matthew's 24th chapter, verse 14.
And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come.
The study of the spread of Christianity conducted by Christians of the 19th century establishes that this was indeed the time that Christ's message had been conveyed to the entire world. By 1816, according to the records of the British Foreign Bible Society and the American Bible Society, 421 million copies of the Bible had been distributed in 50 languages to practically every country in the world. Massive efforts by all Christian churches were launched to spread the good news. In 1842, Mr. Spicer, in his book, Our Day in the Light of Prophecy, stated that the gospel in his day had been spread to 95% of the world's inhabitants. Later in 1842, he also stated that 5 treaty ports in China were opened for commerce and missionaries.
Also, in that same year, Dr. Livingston, with the aid of his medical qualifications, opened the door to Bible preaching in the African interior.
In 1844, Turkey was prevailed upon to recognize the right of Muslims to become Christians. In 1844, Mr. Allen Gardines established the South American Mission. In a yearbook and guide to East Africa, it is written that Christian missions began their activities and preaching to African peoples during that time period.
Dr. D.L. Leonard writes in his book, 100 Years of Missions.
For the first time since the apostolic period occurred, an outburst of general missionary zeal and activity happened. He was referring to the middle of the 19th century.
Dr. A.T. Pearson wrote in his book, Modern Mission Century.
India, Siam, Burma, China, Japan, Turkey, Africa, Mexico, and South America all were successively and successfully entered. Within 5 years, from 1853 to 1858, New facilities were given to the entrance and the occupation of 7 different countries, together embracing half the world population.
Mr. G.S. Faber also writes in 8 dissertations.
The stupendous endeavors of one gigantic community to convey the Scriptures in every language to every part of the globe may well deserve to be considered as an eminent sign even of these eventful times. Unless I be much mistaken, such endeavors are preparatory to the final grand diffusion of Christianity, which is the theme of so many inspired prophets, and which cannot be so far distant in the present day.
Was Mr. Faber mistaken? Were so many Christian scholars mistaken? Were their opinions based on facts or fiction? As our investigation progresses, we'll be able to answer these questions also. Other verses from the Old and New Testament point to this time period and center around the city of Jerusalem. Some of these prophecies are quite obvious, while others are subject to some interpretation. In the book of Luke, chapter 21, verses 24 to 27, we read,
"And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And there shall be signs in the sun, and the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and waves roaring. Men's hearts failing them for fear, and looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the power of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory."
In these verses, Jesus Christ is warning the Jews that they would be destroyed and banished from the holy city of Jerusalem, and that the city of Jerusalem would fall under the control of the Gentiles for a set period of time. At the end of this time, when the Jews are allowed to return to Jerusalem, Christ was to appear, and this appearance was to be accompanied by many other signs.
The first part of this prophecy came to pass in 70 AD, when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman Emperor Titus. Many Jews were exiled and scattered. In 132 AD, the Jews under the leadership of Bar Kokhba rebelled against the Romans, trying to regain their freedom. Again, they were crushed by the Roman army, and Jerusalem was destroyed, and a new city, Aelia Capitolina, was constructed on those ruins. Under Roman law, Jews were not allowed to enter Jerusalem. In 637, Arabs took control of Jerusalem, and the same restriction on the Jews applied. The restriction upon the Jews was lifted when Turkey signed the Edict of Tolerance, allowing Jews to freely enter Jerusalem. This document was signed on March 21st, 1844. Shortly thereafter, Jews started to migrate back to Jerusalem.
This was the end of the time of the Gentiles, and this was the time that Christ's return was expected. Most interesting is the fact that this same year is also referred to in another part of the New Testament. We read in the book of Revelation concerning the holy city of Jerusalem in chapter 11, verses 2 and 3.
"In the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days."
Christian scholars all agree that in Bible prophecy, 1 day stands for 1 year. This is supported in several verses, one of which is found in Ezekiel, chapter 4, verse 6.
"I have appointed these each day for a year."
The Christian scholars came to the conclusion that since at that time the Gentiles who controlled Jerusalem were Muslims, that this time period of 1,260 or 60 days must refer to the Islamic calendar. And 1,260 of the Islamic calendar is 1844 of the Christian calendar. Other Christian scholars took interest in the prophecies contained in the book of Daniel, most likely because Daniel is mentioned by Jesus in Matthew's 24th chapter, which deals exclusively with his second coming. In Daniel chapter 12, verses 11 and 12, we find reference to more dates. We read,
And from the time of the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up. There shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waiteth, and cometh to the 1,335 days.
Using the same method of calculation as we did for the verses found in the book of Revelation, we come up with the dates on the Christian calendar of 1874, 1889, and 1914. We now know when this practice of proclaiming the second coming became commonplace. And we've also discovered from the Bible several verses which clearly indicate the second coming was to occur during the middle of the 19th century. Let's now move on to the next category of prophecies, the ones that refer to special events and circumstances that were to arise during that time, the time of Christ's second coming.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from the heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken.
The 19th century was a witness to a phenomenal amount of astronomical activity. Some periodical and expected, but most were unique and unexpected. Henry James Foreman states in his book, The Story of Prophecy,
It was the 19th century, yet the shooting stars of 1833 and the perihelia of rings around the sun in 1843 were objects of the most awesome speculation and discussion. And the tail of the great comet of 1843 measured 108 million miles in length. Whole families were engaged in making shrouds against that fateful day.
An account of some of the astronomical activity, or heavenly signs, of that time period are as follows.
In 1811, a comet appeared with a head 1,125,000 miles in diameter, larger than the sun. The tail was 100 million miles in length. It was the first of several spectacular comets of the 19th century. Biela's comet was first discovered in 1772, but was not found to be periodical until 1826. In 1832, the comet passed very close to the Earth. In 1845, the comet was observed to break into two, and in 1852, at the time of its expected return, it was found that the two parts of the comet were both very faint and separated by over 1 million miles. It did not return in 1866. The swarm from von Nostrand was observed during December in 1798. 1830 and 1838. Up to 1885, many brilliant meteors were associated with the radiant point, with 4 observers on November 27th of that year, observing no less than 39,546 meteors in 4 hours and 8 minutes. Since 1899, very few showers from this comet have been observed. Records of Leonid's comet are found as far back as 585 AD. In 1799, 1833, and 1866 to 1867, this comet caused the most spectacular showers of modern times. The Great Comet of 1843, which has not been given a name, was a periodical comet with an orbit of 400 years. It had the longest tail of any comet on record, 200 million miles in length, making it a sight of grandeur. Donati's comet lit the sky in 1858. Another great comet, one of the brightest of modern times, passed within 1/3 million miles of the sun in 1882. Yet another comet appeared in 1861. At one time, the comet was brighter than any star in the sky except Venus, and a peculiar glow suffused the entire sky. It could be easily seen in broad daylight. Morehouse comet appeared in 1908, Halley's in 1835 and 1910. The head of Holmes comet had a diameter in excess of 1 million miles. It is one of the largest on record and appeared in 1892, 1899, and 1906. Since then, it has not been seen. On June 30th, 1908, the greatest meteor fall in historic times took place in Siberia. Scientists still study this phenomenon because of its great destructive power. It was probably the head of a small comet. Lunar and solar eclipses occurred in rapid succession in the east in 1894 and the west in 1895.
Indeed, to those witnessing these events, it must have seemed as if the stars were falling from the sky. Another prophecy pertaining to unique events is also found in Matthew's 24th chapter, verse 6. Here we read,
And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. A sampling of wars fought during the last century include:
One of the first wars of the 19th century was between France and her allies and Russia. On June 24, 1812, Napoleon, at the head of 600,000 troops, crossed the Niemen and engaged Russian troops at Borodino. Napoleon lost 40,000 troops and 40 generals. Russia lost 50,000. Eventually Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia joined forces to defeat Napoleon at Waterloo in 1815. The Greek War of Independence, 1821 to 1830, appealed to Western and European romanticism. With the help of Russia, Britain, and France, Greece won her independence. However, her frontiers were very small. James Madison started the war between Britain and America in 1812. It occurred for no clear reason and ended with no clear results. During the reign of Mahmud II, the steady enfeeblement of the Ottoman Empire began. From 1831 to 1841, Egypt and Turkey quarreled and fought many battles. In 1839, when Mahmud died and the Turkish fleet surrendered to Egypt, Britain intervened. They bombarded Beirut, humiliating Mehmet Ali, forcing an agreement. In October of 1853, Russia invaded the feeble Turkish Empire to gain a hold in the Mediterranean. France and Britain sent a force to the Black Sea to expel the Russians from Turkey. On June 23rd, because of Turkish defense and cholera, Russia retreated out of Turkish territory. For reasons unknown, France and Britain decided to invade the Crimean and capture the strongest Russian naval base on the Black Sea. What ensued was one of the grimmest accidents of history, a pointless campaign. In 1859, Austria opened hostilities against Italy. Prussia stood silent, while the French army moved. France defended Rome until their defeat on September 20th, 1870. In December 1860, South Carolina seceded from the Union and declared independence. In January 1861, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and Louisiana followed, then Texas. War began on April 12, 1861, when the Southern Army attacked Fort Sumter. It ended on April 9, 1865, with the North victorious. The Union was saved. Casualties of one battle, the Battle of Gettysburg, totaled nearly 46,000. Britain, France, and Spain signed an agreement in July of 1861 to collect the debts owed to them by Mexico. Napoleon's force entered and occupied Mexico City. When the American Civil War was over, Washington intervened and ordered the French out. They withdrew in February of 1867. In the year 1858, an Anglo-French expedition attacked Canton and Taku, imposing the Treaty of Tientsin. When the Chinese balked at the treaty in 1860, the French attacked Pelican and the British burnt the imperial palace. The treaty was reimposed. Bismarck of Germany invaded Austria in June of 1866. Austria sent her troops against Prussia. Italy invaded Venetia to divide Francis Joseph. Austria was crushed and was excluded from Germany. Venetia went to Italy. In India, mutiny broke out in May of 1857 and grew into an insurrection which spread quickly through the whole Ganges basin and reached Delhi. British forces entered Delhi, where in July 1858 the revolt was ruthlessly stamped out. In 1864, Peru was attacked by Spain, and Paraguay, under the dictatorship of Lopez, attacked Argentina. After 5 years of savage warfare, Paraguay emerged ruined and depopulated. France declared war on Prussia in 1870 over the throning of Prince Leopold as King of Spain. France was not prepared while Prussia had a modern, well-trained army at her disposal. France capitulated on January 28, 1871. In 1877, Russia declared war on Turkey. Because of pressure from Austria, Russia halted her advance 10 miles from Constantinople. On May 31st, an agreement between Britain and Austria ended the war. In 1879, British troops invaded Zululand. In one battle, 20,000 Zulus surprised 1,800 British troops. Only 355 British troops survived. China declared war on Japan in 1894 over the possession of Korea. China was crushed on land and sea, forced to give up Korea, Pescadores, and Liaotung Peninsula to Japan. In the spring of 1900, the Boxer Rebellion broke out in China, born of a fanatical hatred of foreigners. An international flotilla arrived in July to quell the rebellion and occupied Peking from August of 1900 to September 1901. War broke out between the Boer republics and Great Britain in October of 1899. The skill and tenacity of the Boer farmers had been understated and serious defeats were inflicted on the British forces. In February of 1897, the Greeks attempted to take possession of Crete, whose inhabitants had risen in revolt against the Turks. Turkey declared war on April 18th, crushing the Greeks in Thessaly. America, in sympathy with Cuba, went to war with Spain in April of 1898. Spanish fleets were annihilated in the harbor of Manila and Santiago Bay. American troops landed in Cuba, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. The Filipinos fought a guerrilla war against American troops for 3 years thereafter. These were the days of wars and rumors of wars.
Indeed, history clearly shows us that this prophecy was fulfilled during the 19th century, as the sound of wars and rumors of wars echoed around the globe.
This concludes part 1 of the case of the missing Messiah. In the initial stages of our investigation, we made several interesting discoveries. We discovered that the Christian scholars of the 19th century eagerly awaited the coming of the Messiah, and that their expectations were based on the fulfillment of Bible prophecies. Prophecies like Christianity spreading to all nations, the Gentiles allowing Jews to migrate back to Jerusalem, comets and meteor showers making it appear as if the stars were falling from heaven, eclipses of the sun and moon, and wars and rumors of wars. Other scriptures which added to the Christian scholars' expectations indicated the specific dates of 1844, 1874, 1889, and 1914. In part 2 of the case of the missing Messiah, we'll continue investigating other biblical scriptures that found their fulfillment during the same time period, the time of the expected return of Christ.
The case of the missing Messiah.
Welcome to part 2 of the case of the missing Messiah. In this program, we'll continue to investigate the verses from the Bible, which foretold unique and special events which were to take place during this time period. The time period Christian scholars had concluded was the time of the expected return of the Messiah.
Christian scholars also pointed to a prophecy in the Old Testament, which referred to the time of the Second Advent. It is found in the book of Daniel. In chapter 12, verse 4, we find,
But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased.
This verse is predicting two separate, unique events which were to take place at the time of the end, the time Jesus was expected to return. Knowledge shall be increased is self-explanatory, and it shouldn't be difficult to determine if the world witnessed an extraordinary increase in knowledge during the same period of unique astronomical activity and wars. The phrase, many shall run to and fro, could be interpreted as a time of unrest, of riots and revolutions. So we'll look at these types of activities also. Was this increase of knowledge witnessed in the last century? Was the last century also a period of restlessness, of movements and conspiracies, of riots and revolutions? Our investigation turned up the following evidence.
Neither the steam engine nor the railways were 19th century inventions, but they were brought together for the first time in 1804. By the 1840s, railways were spreading everywhere. The face of war changed more radically in the 60 years after Waterloo in 1815 than in the previous 600 years. Artillery developments were the most spectacular. Submarines were also an addition to warfare in the 1800s. The Garrett managed to remain underwater for prolonged periods of time. In farming, new models of plows, dibbling machines, turnip cutters, dynamometers, hoes, chain harrow, and shaft-cutting machines were invented. Garrett's portable thresher appeared in 1847. Then the North American reopened binder and cotton gin followed. The combination of developments in reaping and threshing was the combine harvester, pulled by over 30 horses. The thirst for knowledge was universal, especially scientific knowledge. It was the age of lectures, museums, and libraries. The Royal Polytechnic Institute was founded in 1838 in London for the advancement of the arts and practical sciences. Photography goes back to 1839, when Henry Fox Talbot produced sharp, lasting negative images on chemically sensitive paper. Steel took the place of iron in engineering when Henry Bessemer discovered how to manufacture steel on a commercial scale. Steel and iron revolutionized naval strategy. The Great Eastern ship was a bold innovation. It had a double-skin iron hull and combined paddle wheel and propeller propulsion. She was launched in 1858. Bridge building was revolutionized by J.A. Roebling. The Brooklyn Bridge, designed in 1869, used continuous wire cable suspension and spanned a distance of 1,535 feet. The Belgian engineer Graham's electrical machines foreshadowed the day of the dynamo in 1870. The transatlantic cable connecting Europe and America was laid in 1866, bringing people of two continents closer together. International exhibitions of art and technical achievements were held in London in 1851, America in 1876, Paris in 1867, and Melbourne in 1880, where a new lightweight metal named aluminum was displayed. The Suez Canal provided a link between East and West. It was completed in the 1860s. From 1861, the United States began to experiment with a new and exceptionally powerful source of energy, petroleum. The bicycle also arrived in the middle of the 19th century. The hobby horse and penny farthing were two popular models. Even before the telephone was invented, pictures were transmitted by electric telegraph in 1863. The automobile, a symbol of luxury and adventure, arrived around 1887. Early ones were called horseless carriages. Thomas Edison was the most prolific of inventors, contributing important ideas to the development of the telegraph, telephone, electric light, and cinema. He patented the phonograph in 1877. It was a cylinder covered in tin foil worked by hand. Alexander Graham Bell emigrated to Canada in 1870. He produced the telephone in 1876 and made the first phone call between New York and Chicago in 1892. The Underwood typewriter of 1897 already had all the basic features of modern typewriters, a huge advance over the failed Wheatstone of 1855. In 1894, Marconi's wireless sent signals 1.5 miles, by 1901 across the Atlantic. Pictures in motion date from the 1880s. By 1895, public film shows were inaugurated all over Europe. After 1876, refrigeration in ships and on freight cars enables frozen meat from Australia and the Americas to be conveyed to Europe. Science gained momentum throughout the century. By 1840, the laboratory of Justus von Liebig was producing far-reaching results in organic and inorganic chemistry. W.K. Röntgen discovered X-rays, which penetrated solids in 1895. Charles Darwin published his epoch-making The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection in 1859, revolutionizing biology and man's place on nature. Astronomy made progress due to the construction of larger telescopes. The telescope of Lick Observatory in California, completed in 1888, had a 36-inch objective lens. Louis Pasteur successfully inoculated his first patient against rabies in 1885. He had already produced inoculation against chicken cholera and anthrax. In aviation, the Wright brothers made the first successful flight in a powered, heavier-than-air machine in North Carolina in 1903. The longest lasted 59 seconds. In 1850, over one-third of the adult population of Britain and the German states and one-half the adult population of France and Belgium were illiterate. Great advances were made in the next 30 years. The state assumed responsibility for primary education in Austria in 1868, Britain in 1870, Germany in 1872, Switzerland in 1874, Italy in 1877, France and Holland in 1878, and Belgium in 1879. By 1900, illiteracy had fallen to less than 5% in Britain, France, Belgium, Germany, Scandinavia, and 10% in America. New colleges were provided for women.
The invention fertility of the 19th century is one of its most astonishing features. It was an age of miracles. Turning to the second part of Daniel's prophecy regarding restlessness, conspiracies, riots, and revolutions, our investigation turned up the following evidence.
In 1811-1812, distress among the working class in England produced the Luddite riots. In 1826, large-scale riots broke out involving the destruction of power loom factories in Manchester. This unrest was brought on by a severe recession. In 1819, a reform meeting in Manchester ended in bloodshed. Ironically, it became known as the Peterloo Massacre. Riots raged from September to December in southern and eastern England in 1830. The rioting agricultural workers directed their main efforts against threshing machines. During the plug riots of 1842, strikers stopped, instead of wrecking the mills, by removing the safety lead plugs in the steam engines. In Latin America, revolutions against the Spanish and Portuguese occurred in Venezuela, Argentina, Paraguay, and Mexico in the early 1800s under the leadership of Simon Bolivar. In Naples, revolution broke out in 1820 and in Modena and Parma in 1831. From July 27th to July 29th, 1830, students and workers raised barricades and made themselves masters of France, leading to the flight of Charles X. A month after the uprising in Paris, insurrection broke out in Brussels, followed by a proclamation of Belgium independence on October 4th from Holland. When the Polish army were ordered to join the Russian army to stamp out a revolution in France, a popular insurrection was unleashed by the people and the army. Russia brutally put down this uprising, and by October 1831, Russian order reigned in Warsaw. In Canada, two separate struggles occurred, the first in 1837, the second in 1838. Both were won by the Loyalists. 1848 was everywhere a year of revolutions. All over Europe, in backrooms and cellars, revolutionary clubs and meetings proliferated and maintained the ferment. The Slavs were too scattered to form a single nation. A rising in Prague in June 1848 was ruthlessly crushed by Austria. Croats, Slovenes, and Serbs clamored for the creation of an autonomous state. In September of 1848, the Croats invaded Hungary. They were driven back. Agitation broke out in Prussia by communists and Democrats shortly thereafter. Also in 1848, a short, sharp, violent conflict erupted between the propertied and propertyless in Paris, leading to the abdication of Louis Philippe. Imperial, Russian, and Serbo-Croat troops put down the Hungarian revolt in 1849. On March 2, 1849, Charles Albert met defeat after attacking the Austrian army at Novara 5 days earlier. On July 1st, the French entered Rome and re-established the temporal power of Pope Pius IX. By 1851, the insurgents in China, known as Taiping, had seized Hankow and Nanking, which became the capital of the Taiping Empire. British officers led the Chinese Imperial Army to victory, and the rebellion was squashed. Insurrection broke out in January in 1863 when Russia attempted to conscript Poles for military service. Russian General Muraviv armed Polish peasants against their noble masters. In 1864, Crete, populated largely by Greeks, rebelled against Turkey. The Sultan stamped out the revolt. Colombia became a united nation only after a civil war in 1862. At that time, Bolivia was in the grip of anarchy. The first communist experiment was tried in Paris after France's defeat by Prussia in 1870, when revolutionary factions seized power. Government reprisals were ruthless. On March 13, 1881, the nihilist organization known as People's Will assassinated Tsar Alexander. The bomb blast shook every European throne, and reprisal in Russia was severe. The general mood of Europe and the U.S. was more aggressive in the last years of the century than it had been for several decades before. In November 1887, the Life Guards were called into London to clear Trafalgar Square of demonstrators. On May 1, 1890, militant workers demonstrated in both America and Europe, demanding an 8-hour workday. In 1894, the regular army was called in to quell rioting strikers in Illinois. In China, rebellions, murderers, massacres, and succession crises accompanied the rise to power of Empress Tsoi Si in 1898. R.A. Wallace, in his book The Wonderful Century, 1898, summarized the mood of the time.
There was, therefore, no 19th century resting place. The French Revolution, combined with the Industrial Revolution, both unfinished, affected both ways of thinking and feeling. The repercussions are the case of the missing Messiah.
Welcome to Part 3, or the conclusion of the case of the missing Messiah. In this program, we're going to analyze those prophecies from Category 3 and 4, as mentioned in Program 1, or the prophecies which are descriptive of the promised Messiah and his followers, and how they were to be treated, accepted, etc. And also the prophecies which indicate the location of his coming. We hope to bring the case of the missing Messiah to a successful conclusion by applying these prophecies to those who claim to be the Messiah or who claim to represent the return of Christ during the same time period. Please stay with us as we conclude the case of the missing Messiah.
Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven, with power and great glory. In Luke we find, For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. And ye shall be betrayed by parents and brethren and kinfolk and friends, and some of you shall be put to death. And ye shall be hated by all men for my name's sake. But there shall not a hair on your head perish. Chapter 21, verses 15, 16, 17, and 18.
These verses paint a rather grim picture of how those who would accept the Messiah, those who would pledge their loyalty to the one who would represent the coming of Christ, were to be treated. Hatred, persecution, and even death awaited them. They were to be betrayed by their own family members, and entire nations would conspire to oppose them. The promised Messiah, from these verses, would possess profound knowledge and wisdom, such that no one on earth could argue against him. And even though afflicted with severe persecution, he would be protected by God Almighty. His appearance would be of a cloudy nature. Many heavenly signs would be shown as testimony to his truth, and his message would run counter to all contemporary thought and expectations, causing the nations of the earth to mourn. From our earlier investigation, the years 1844, 1874, 1889, and 1914 will hold some degree of importance. As the focus of our investigation narrows, two more verses pertaining to Christ's return must be mentioned. The first is found in Matthew's 24th chapter in verse 5. Here we read,
For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many, and many false prophets shall rise and deceive many.
This prophecy was also fulfilled in the last century, as several people claim to be sent by God. They were the Mahdi of Sudan, Alexander Dowie of Zion, Ohio, who claimed to be Elijah III, Joseph Smith, who claimed to be a prophet, Ali Muhammad Bab, who claimed to be the Mahdi, Baha'u'llah of Iran, who claimed to be the manifestation of God, Pigot of England, who claimed to be the Messiah, and Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, India, who claimed to represent Christ in his second coming. Our search can be narrowed even further by means of the last Bible verse, to be analyzed in this investigation. It states,
For as lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth ever unto the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be.
When this verse was revealed by Jesus, he was in Jerusalem. He clearly indicates that his second coming will be manifested east of Jerusalem and would also spread to the west. To conclude this investigation, we need only to apply the descriptive prophecies to the claimants, and only those claimants who came from east of Jerusalem. They include Mirza Ali Muhammad Bab of Shiraz, Baha'u'llah, Mirza Hussain Ali Nur of Tehran, and Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, India.
Ali Muhammad Bab of Shiraz was born in 1820 and died in 1850. His original claim was that of Bab in 1844. Later, he claimed to be the Mahdi. He was executed in 1850 on charges of insurrection. The time and style of his death disqualify him from fulfilling several of the descriptive biblical prophecies, and therefore he can't be the promised Messiah. Baha'u'llah, Mirza Hussain Ali Nuri, was born in Tehran in 1817 and died in May of 1892. In 1867, he claimed to be Baha'u'llah, the manifestation of God. He passed away before the eclipses of the sun and moon of 1894 and 1895. However, his followers argue that he has fulfilled all the biblical prophecies pertaining to the second coming.
Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, India, was born in 1835 and left this world in 1908. Both the years of his birth and death are marked by heavenly signs. Halley's Comet made its most dramatic appearance of modern times in 1835, and a great meteor impact occurred in Siberia in 1908. Qadian, India is due east of Jerusalem. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad authored over 80 books of religious and comparative religious studies and claimed to be the Mahdi and Messiah whose advent had been predicted in the Bible and other holy books. His most vicious opponents admitted, when commenting on just one of his books, titled Brahine Ahmadiyya.
He challenged the representatives of other religions to prove the truth of their religions with the same or less number of arguments as had been presented by him in support of the Holy Quran in his monumental work. Qadianism, A Critical Study, page 27.
Towards the end of 1890, he announced that God had informed him that Jesus was dead and was not going to return, and that he was in fact representing the second advent of Jesus. This announcement brought a storm of protest and threats from Christians and Muslims alike, who both expected Jesus to descend from the skies. Regarding the eclipses of the sun and the moon in 1894-95, he wrote,
"In my age only, in the month of Ramadan, eclipses of the sun and the moon occurred. In my age, in accordance with the authentic sayings of the Holy Prophet of the Holy Quran and earlier books, there was plague all over the country. And in my age only, new modes of transport, namely railways, came into existence. And in my age only, as per my prophecies, terrible earthquakes came. Does not then righteousness demand that one should not be bold in denying me? Look, I swear by Almighty God and say that thousands of signs establishing my truth have been manifested, are being manifested, and will be manifested." Hakikatul Wahi, page 45. Commenting on the meteor showers of 1885, he wrote, "I kept on watching these meteor showers with great delight, because it was revealed to me that this sign was in support of me, for it had been designated in earlier revealed scriptures to be a great sign of the advent of the Messiah." Aina Kamalate Islam.
Today, the followers of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, India, exceed 10 million and have established their missions in 135 countries. They propagate their faith by means of clear and logical arguments based on wisdom and proof. However, he and his followers were and still are persecuted in many countries. In 1984, General Zia of Pakistan brought Ordinance 20 into law, making it a criminal offense for the followers of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad to practice or propagate their religion. The Saudi Arabian government does not allow the followers of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad to perform the pilgrimage to Mecca. To obtain a passport from the government of Pakistan, a person must sign a declaration found on the passport application form that Mirza Ghulam Ahmad is false. Amnesty International is concerned that the Pakistani authorities are failing to protect the lives and physical safety of members of the Ahmadiyya community in Lahore. Over the course of 100 years, dozens of Ahmadis have been murdered in cold blood only because they believed the promised Messiah has come.
Earlier in our investigation, we discovered biblical verses mentioning 4 dates: 1844, 1874, 1889, and 1914, and said we would apply these dates to anyone who claimed to represent the second advent of Christ. Applying these verses to the life of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, we found the following. In 1844, he was yet a small child, and nothing out of the ordinary is reported during this time period. In 1874, long before he began his movement, he wrote the details of a dream he experienced in that year. He stated that God had showed him in that dream that he would have many very holy companions, and all his financial needs would be taken care of, and he would be given great wealth. In 1889, he officially started the organization which is known today as the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat and began taking pledges of allegiance. In 1886, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad announced that God had revealed to him the birth of a very special, blessed son. He was born in 1889. In 1914, this same son, named Bashir, was elected as the second successor to his father and led the organization for 52 years.
Having applied the 4 categories of prophecies found in the Bible referring to the second coming of Christ, and applying those prophecies to the life and teachings of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, India, it appears that he has unequivocally fulfilled the second coming of Christ and is the promised Messiah.
It's been 150 years since William Miller and his followers returned to their homes confused and dejected because Christ failed to appear. We, as Ahmadi Muslims, on the other hand, are pleased and satisfied because we believe God kept his promises, as he always does, and sent the second Messiah, as expected. It took the world 300 years to accept the first Messiah. We're confident it won't take as long for the world to accept the second Messiah. Thank you for watching. I'm Atawal Wahid Lahey.
And I'm Ishaq Fonseca.
And I'm Asin Khan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
I didn't want to finish the case of the missing Messiah without spending some time with the creator, the author, one of the driving forces behind it, Masood Ahmad Khan. Masood, thank you very much for joining us in our humble studios today.
Thanks.
And I'll start by asking 2 questions. When did you start working on the case of the missing Messiah, and why did you start working on it?
Well, they are related questions, so I'll answer the first question first. Some 35 years ago, when I had newly arrived in European countries, I began to notice on Sundays and on various church functions days, they had this plaques or a sign standing on a street corner saying, repent, the end is nigh and Messiah is coming. And I couldn't help wondering, what makes these people saying this? And why are they standing on the street corner trying to tell people to do this? So I began my study, and while I was working some other places, I couldn't sort of dedicate my 24-hour a day to this study. So over a period of time, I collected a great deal of references and read a lot of things, and that's what was the reason why I began that insane people, complete sane people can't stand on a street corner and do and say these things. So I have to investigate. Such is my nature. So that's what was the driving thing behind it.
When was this?
Well, this was around, well, actually it began in around 1957 or so. But I was very new in the European countries, so I mean, I would only notice it one, although I even myself began to visit churches which was nearby in my apartment where I lived. On Sundays I would go and visit them, and I found the same message there as well in a slightly different fashion, more organized.
So you must have been very surprised that these people were proclaiming the Messiah was coming when you had already accepted one who had claimed to be the Messiah.
Well, precisely. That was my confusion, or that was one of the reason me investigating why these people are saying for someone who has already come. And from my point of view, the search must stop, and yet these people are still advocating. So I was rather at times even adversely treated, at least by words, not by physical, giving me a very negative connotation and thinking that I was some sort of a heathen amongst them. Yet, so as for the confusion, if you like to call it, or a state of mind is a better word, that I wondered why these people are doing that. So I had to investigate. I was forced to, because I was a follower and a recognizer of Messiah of the time. And I had to do something so that now they can know it too.
What's their reaction when you present them this case?
Well, this is really a question that I would say that it begins with, if you just simply say that you advocate Messiah has come, it is taken as a big joke or a big with no serious attitude. But as I progressed in it, and I've talked to various people, they granted you little time to talk and make the presentation, the seriousness did emerge. But in the end, when I made the presentation in some churches as well, and particularly did admit that while we cannot find the mistake in your presentation, nonetheless, he didn't come. What's the confusion? We know he didn't come, so we must be wrong somewhere. So my answer was simple enough that I'll accept the error if you show me where it is. Either your Bible is not right, because all the evidences presented by me are from Bible, or if you insist Bible is correct, then you must show me where you made a mistake of understanding something. But you can't just close the book by simply saying we made a mistake, but not show the mistake where it is. So, but I realize that it's a very difficult thing for people to suddenly say, yes, I'm right and Messiah has come. And as has been previously prophesied, that it will take time. By our own Messiah it has been prophesied. So I'm patient too. I deliver the message. Hopefully it will be recognized sooner or later.
I don't think the Christian groups understand the concept of Messiah. I don't think they understand that when Jesus said he was going to return, he was inferring that religious history was going to repeat itself. And the conditions and the events surrounding Messiah, the second Messiah, would be similar. Since they made Jesus into a God, any Messiah that comes who is less than a God, they don't want to accept. And you've seen evidence of this firsthand.
As a matter of fact, this is the first stumbling block. And ironically, a Christian should be the last one to create this as a stumbling block, for the simple reason that in their lifetime, in Christ Jesus, son of Mary's lifetime, the person who was to witness him was also to be descended from heaven and reincarnate of Elijah. Yet it was Christ who said that it is John the Baptist. And realizing this parallelity, they should realize that the coming of second coming of Jesus would also be, or if it is so in that way, they shouldn't object to it, if nothing else.
The precedent has been set by Jesus himself.
Right.
And we mentioned that in the program.
Right.
I've been watching many Christian programs these days. The central theme of all the programs is the return of Christ. They seem to have come to the conclusion that it's going to happen at any time. But the scenario they paint is difficult to swallow, let alone understand. Now, I'll explain it as I understand it, and hopefully I'm close to your understanding of the same subject. The rapture is going to happen first, and those Christians that are dead and buried, along with some Christians that are alive, will disappear, presumably going to heaven with Jesus. Right, that's the first step. Then the Antichrist will appear after there's havoc created over the earth. A false prophet will appear who will support the Antichrist. And Oral Roberts said they'll be supported by Satan, so you have the unholy trinity. And after some time, Jesus will return in such a capacity that everybody will see him and recognize him, with these Christians that have been previously taken to the skies or to heaven, and they will be given domain and power to rule mankind. And they're actually producing videos depicting how this is going to happen. So I think the case of the missing Messiah is a timely reply to it. Was one of your reasons for producing the case of the missing Messiah and writing the script to give a logical alternative to what the Christians were expecting?
You're absolutely right, because the confusion around the world, including Christians and other religions who are expecting, is really deserves that there should be a clarity of presentation being made, and that was the motivation. And I must point out here to you that our own Messiah, Messiah of the age, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, had indicated in his writings and warned the world that you can do all you can. You can Pray all you want. You can do worldly means, use them at your disposal as much as you can, but no one will come from heaven as you are expecting him. And your generation will pass by, even then nobody will come. Posterity of their generation will pass by, and nobody will descend from heaven. And that's what he said. 300 years will not go by from this day when he spoke this, that this faith, meaning he himself, meaning Messiah, will be accepted through reason and logic. He's counting on the fact of the wisdom of the Western people and the Eastern people, that through wisdom they will learn this thing. And I can see it happening. I can see it slowly at a lower level. It is happening around.
Yeah, I would think that after the year 2000 has passed, a lot of people who have been told these fairy tales or children's stories will start to reject this idea, because they've been expecting it for over 150 years, saying that it's going to happen at any time, yet the event keeps getting more and more delayed. And we should maybe spend a program on this subject of what Messiah means, because I think if the Christians of today could understand Messiah and where Messiah fits into the community of prophets, because we as Muslims accept the Messiah as a prophet of God, if they can understand his role and his role in Judaism, why he was rejected, what the expectations were of his people compared to how he came, they would start to understand and see how the second manifestation of Messiah has happened recently, a little over 100 years ago, and the religious history of Messiah has repeated itself exactly. And I can go into a long, detailed account, and I know you could easily help me, and it's a very interesting thing to witness. The condition of the Jews at the time of Jesus, their subjugation by the Roman Empire, him coming from an insignificant small village with no resources at his hands, yet eventually being successful after severe persecution to the point where his followers had to live in tombs and caves. And the exact same thing has happened in the life of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian. Now, he wasn't looking up at the Roman Empire, but he was looking up at the British Empire. And I think you told me what Winston Churchill said about the British Empire. Do you remember what you told me?
I think you quoted that in your program, if I'm not mistaken.
No.
Okay. No, remind me if you...
He said that my empire is nothing but an extension of the Roman Empire.
Right, okay, sorry about that.
And that's a prophecy in the Bible, the Roman Empire would re-emerge. And you see the same circumstances. The condition of the Muslims were exactly the same condition of the Jews. And you see this Messiah coming from a small, insignificant village, making the same outlandish claims the first Messiah made. And the only crime he and his followers committed was the simple fact that, yes, we believe the Messiah has come. And look how they've been treated. Very badly. And you witnessed that persecution firsthand. You've lived through it.
Yes, partly, and when I was young and growing up, and in those days it wasn't as bad as today, as I hear, but it was nonetheless very powerfully impact. However, your questions were, I will try to remember all that in a sequence, so that the parallelity between the first Messiah, son of Mary, and the second one is very, like you quoted one or two incidents yourself, that one of the reasons why they were expecting to come from like a king of the world and he will deliver them from the bondage of Romans. There are other spiritual reasons as well. But the reason of coming of a Messiah always has been the same. God has promised his mankind, I will send you help when you need one. And if you examine the moral decay during the period of Messiah, that it's frightening when Jesus Christ pointed towards some of the people and said, you are vipers and snakes, and he referred to their worship in synagogue and called them that God gave you this house to worship and you have made it a den of thieves. The reality is that the moral standard of the people at the time had gone that down, that as usual, grace of mercy of God demanded that he himself sends another person who will guide you. Now titles have differed. Sometimes you call messenger with a book, messenger without a book. This one was a Messiah, which is usually means he comes at the end of somebody who has brought a book before. That was the reason it was given this title. He was a Messiah of Mosaic law, but Messiah meaning savior, some kind of a man who receives information from God, helps them morally, and removes them from the total destruction, morally speaking. So this was the reason. Similar parallel theme was developed through Holy Prophet of Islam. He too was a book holder, and at the end of his era, or 1400 years later, just exactly as 1400 years after Moses, this Messiah came for the same reason. The moral standard of all people were so deplorable that if you read the history, it frightens you. Like even the good Christians were destroying themselves morally, and Hindus and everyone, and Muslims, and it was again once God's promise was being manifested that I will send you another help. But usually after the help is given, and if not accepted, there is repercussions to that effect. Lots of prophecies have been written by our Messiah warning the people what will happen.
So God's attitude is, if you treat that messenger, that helper, with neutrality, then God has no concern. But when you place barriers in his way and persecute him and his people, then you'll come under God's wrath or punishment.
Right.
And nobody likes to talk about that.
No. I would not be able to tell you exactly what God will do to whoever he chooses to. However, there are two kinds of punishment seems to be going on. One, which occurs after death. God questions you. Those people, if they've been given the message, do not accept it, they will free to answer this question on the day of judgment to the Creator. But those who persecute and create atrocities amongst the people, you can see in past that their kingdom was destroyed. I mean, I don't know how many examples can I give you in past, and the Christians are aware of it. They proudly mention sometimes there were only 11 people as a disciple of Jesus Christ, but look what happened after that. They became powerful, and the others are the one who are gone and not here today. So same thing will happen.
So circumstances can change very quickly.
Very quickly.
Well, we're about out of time. We have to wrap up this interview. Thank you for being with us today. It was a big help. I think we could spend many hours discussing this subject because the concept of the coming of Messiah branches out into many different subjects, and we just don't have the time or the capacity today. I hope you're going to prepare more papers or scripts for us. I'd like you to work on the same idea from the Islamic perspective. What did Muhammad prophesy? What did the Hadith say regarding the coming of Jesus or Messiah? And also, what were the expectations of various Muslim saints throughout the ages? And maybe we can put a similar program together, because Messiah isn't isolated to just Christianity. It's connected to every single religion of the world, and it will be that second manifestation of Messiah that will eventually unite all the religions of the world under one flag. We believe that's the flag of Islam. Thank you for being with us. I hope you've enjoyed our series on the case of the missing Messiah, and we hope to hear from you soon. Assalamu alaikum.